Hello and welcome to the first of the proper video lessons on topics which will be assessable in the GCSE. Today we're going to be looking at the Constitution. Now the Constitution is something that particularly baffles people. They get the basics, i.e. it is not good, but often people lose marks to get the A or even the B in their depth of explanation about why and how the Constitution actually causes damage. So people will remember proportional representation, but won't be very good at explaining how specifically that leads to political chaos, and as well as that won't have specific examples for that. So the key thing in this video lesson is that you make sure you get an understanding of how does the things in the Constitution cause benefits and negatives, because that is where the marks are in the GCSE. So the overall story of the Constitution is that the Constitution itself will be blamed by many historians as the reason for Hitler. Not the only reason, because there's other factors as well, but they argue that what the Weimar Constitution does is two things. It sets up the chaos and the economic problems and the political problems, which eventually Hitler will exploit to make people vote for him, number one. And Article 48 in the Constitution is what will be used to actually put Hitler into power, and therefore without it Hitler would not come into power. So there's two different ways. It will make the circumstances for people to vote for Nazis, and it will provide Hindenburg with the tool, Article 48, to put Hitler into power come 1933. This will be more obvious when we study that part of the course. So the key thing we need to look at when we look at Constitution is understanding the four major areas of the Constitution and understand their effect on democracy, particularly how they affect democracy and how they make democracy weaker. A-star answers in particular will very often explain balance in their judgments. They won't necessarily say that a Constitution was all bad, and that's something we're going to try and go through today as well. And you don't have to spend too much time on it, but to get the A-star it's really useful at the end of any paragraph to point out, for example, that proportional representation doesn't always mean Hitler, because Germany today has proportional representation and yet they don't have Hitler. So clearly there's other factors, not just proportional representation, which is a problem. Okay, so a bit of context. In January 1919 there is an election about who's going to write the Constitution, and it is a triumph for the pro-democratic parties, the SPD, the Centre Party, or the Z, the DDP, who are the Liberals, as well as a coalition of other smaller parties, which we won't bother to trouble you with. So what we use this for as historians is to point out that later on, people are going to vote increasingly against democratic parties and against democracy. But this shows us that at the very start, people must have liked it to begin with. And so what we can do is you can say, okay, in 1919 they liked it, but come 1924 they really didn't, with only 53 and 48% of the votes going towards pro-democratic parties. There's two elections in 1924. We can point out that something must have happened between 1919, when everyone loved it, to 1924. So it's your evidence to prove that people support extreme parties not because they hate democracy as a default, is that they've learnt to hate democracy, or at least fear and are distrustful of democracy after what happened between 1919 and 1924. So we'll go through the structure in due course, you should have done it in lesson, but essentially the first president is a guy called Ebert. He is the leader of the SPD, he is a person who was instrumental in the November Revolution, and he is overall a good man. He's a pragmatic man. Pragmatic means that you follow what needs to be done, not necessarily what your ideals are. So he'll make alliances with the army, for example, because that means that there's less likely to be a revolution against democracy, even if it goes against vastly his own beliefs. So the big thing to point out in 1919 is 78% of people want democracy, support pro-democratic parties to write the Constitution, and therefore like the idea. This is very important because that vote will go down and down and down and down and down all the way up until 1933, where it's barely 30%. Okay, so we can often use the votes for democratic parties as a gauge, as a way of measuring what are people's opinion of democracy. If most people dislike democracy, it's very hard to prove that unless you say, well, look, if most people dislike democracy because they vote for parties which are anti-democratic. Whereas now, most people are voting for parties which are democratic, which shows they might like the idea of democracy. Okay, so in 1919, a group of the parties which were voted in, mostly the SPD, the Centre Party, and the DDP, get together and decide to write the Constitution. And this Constitution is made and adopted on the 31st of July 1919. Now, the Constitution itself divides up power between loads of different groups. So we're going to start on this. This map's a little bit confusing, but we're going to start on this bottom left-hand corner and work upwards. The basic part of this is the system was very, very democratic. Everyone had the vote, okay, universal suffrage, okay, rather than universal manhood suffrage, which is only men could vote, universal suffrage, and they voted in 2 elections. They voted for the Reichstag, and that's the sort of light blue turquoise colour, and they also voted for the President, or the President, that's the red colour. There are other things as well, but we don't need to worry too much about the Reichsrat, or the Chancellor and Ministers for now, okay? So, really simply, the Reichstag is the Parliament of the Weimar Republic. It is they who have all the parties. The parties themselves vote on laws, and they decide what to do. Now, obviously, you can't have 417, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, members who just randomly decide what to do. It won't work. Everyone will have different ideas, no laws will get done, there's no way to sort of organise a coalition, etc. So instead, they have a Chancellor. A Chancellor is like our Prime Minister, in that they are the person who are in charge of the Reichstag. They're responsible for organising all the other parties and for organising laws to get through. Now, the Chancellor is picked by the President, and there's no clear rules about who the President should pick or shouldn't pick. Okay, there's no rules written in the Constitution, which is its first major weakness, because the President could pick someone who isn't part of the largest party because he doesn't like them. So, for example, SPD members will not get picked to become chancellors from about 1925 onwards because Hindenburg, the president, hates them. The chancellor's job, additionally, the chancellor, because of the nature of the Reichstag, has to be in charge of coalitions. Now, we're going to talk about why this is when we talk about proportional representation. But for now, the chancellor is the person who has to manage loads of different parties to try and get his laws through. So the Chancellor is deliberately designed to be someone who represents the will of the Reichstag, but someone who is not necessarily all-powerful. This is because the Weimar Constitution is used to a system where the Chancellors had a lot of power, particularly under the example of Bismarck, and there was very little democracy. So they also invented the position of President, and that's the one red at the very top. While the Reichstag's job and the Chancellor's job is to organise and pass laws, very simply the job of the President is to keep an eye on the Reichstag and the Chancellor to make sure they don't get too powerful. We call this system checks and balances. Basically the idea that rather than having one body with all the power, you have one body who can pass laws, which is quite powerful, and the other with other powers, usually to balance off and make sure that they can stop the Reichstag and Chancellor having too much power. So the powers of the President, he could not make laws, except for one particular case that we'll come into, but he could have a lot of influence over politics. He is the one who appoints and dismisses the Chancellor. For example, this was designed for if there was an extremist party who got the most amount of votes, the President could decide on someone else rather than the extremist person to be the Chancellor and therefore save democracy. As we shall see, the opposite will happen in due course. But they didn't really think about that at the time. The President is also in charge of summoning and dismissing the Reichstag, so he can dissolve the Reichstag and call for new elections if it isn't working. Now again, this is designed to make sure that democracy works better, because if there's too many split parties, then the President will dissolve it, there'll be new elections, and you're more likely to get an organised and effective Reichstag. As we shall see, the President will actually use this negatively, and use this to get rid of opponents. And also the President is in charge of the armed forces and the judiciary. The armed forces are the people with the guns, the judiciary are people who do the laws. This is because it was feared that the Chancellor, if he had control of the people with guns and the law, they could very quickly make a dictatorship. So by putting the army in the hands of the President, who isn't able to pass or change the law in any way, it was designed to make sure that there couldn't be a dictatorship. As we shall see, though, this is less important, because one thing the President is given is something called Article 48 that we're going to go through in lots of detail in about 10 minutes. So the Constitution itself is, in theory, designed to be as balanced and as avoiding dictatorship as possible, by having separate elections for the Reichstag and the President at different times, so they're more likely to be at different people. So the Reichstag elections every 4 years, The presidential elections every 7, so they very rarely bounce at the same time. They rarely happen at the same time, so it's usually likely to be different people. By making sure that power is split between the people who can make the laws, the Chancellor, and the people who have to control the armed forces and control influence over the Reichstag and the President, they are trying to make sure that one group or one person doesn't get too powerful. Now, as we shall see, that isn't how it quite works out. So, the power of presidents. As I mentioned, they are elected for a 7 years term, and they had to have over 50% of the vote. If you have 3 people going in, one person gets 40%, one person gets 30%, and one person gets 30%, for example, that's a bad example. One person gets 45%, one person gets 30%, and one person gets 25%. Then what you do is you have something called a runoff. What that means is you have another vote, and you remove the person who got the least amount of votes. So if you had one person with 45, one person with 35, one person with 25, what will happen is they have another vote, but the person who got 25% can't run again, and so it's only a choice between the 45 and the 35% person, and the people who voted for the 25% person will vote for one of the other 2 candidates. As mentioned, the President has control over the armed forces. He's something called the Commander-in-Chief, and he has something called Article 48. Now, many people argue, many historians argue, that the presidency in and of itself isn't too powerful. But as soon as you give it Article 48, it basically doesn't need the Reichstag anymore, and therefore has all the power. But we're going to talk about Article 48 later. So, the Reichstag, on the other hand, is the law-making body. They are the only ones who can pass a law. Obviously, the President has Article 48, but that wasn't designed to be used most of the time. They were elected for 4 years using proportional representation, and which we'll discuss in due course. And for every party, every 60,000 votes, they got 1 seat, and the Chancellor was in charge. So, when we are looking at the Constitution, there are 2 major things people will mention in exams, and that's proportional representation and Article 48. And they will explain how both of these cause problems. Your marks will come down to how well you explain how proportional representation and Article 48 cause problems. At the A-star level, your marks will come down to how well you explain these 2 cause problems, plus a balance by how you point out how actually they weren't as bad as many other people would say. I've also mentioned free speech and power of the elites. These are both in the Constitution and both cause problems, but many people doing this at GCSE will not mention this. So it's quite useful to get these in your mind, because then if you mention them, you are showing off to a higher level. So the first one we're going to look at is proportional representation. Now, proportional representation is a system of voting. It's a system of working out how do you get your votes to seats? How do you translate votes to seats? Now, there are 2 major, there are actually hundreds of systems, but the 2 major systems I'm going to look at. The first one is the one we have in Britain. You might notice we don't actually have many coalitions. Yes, we had one in 2010 to 2015, but actually that's quite rare. If you're thinking back, the next era of coalitions is basically the 1920s, 1930s, when there's political chaos all reigning all the way. So our system of first past the post essentially is one that is designed to make, if you look at the maps on the left and right, to bring a majority. I won't go into too much detail why, but essentially what it means is if you win a seat, so if you're, like, every seat is its own little election. So say Hampstead and Kilburn. Hampstead and Kilburn has a little election. Here it's between Labour and the Conservatives. And if Labour gets 31% of the vote and the Conservatives get 30% of the vote, then Labour gets that seat. What that means is those 30 votes that Conservatives get don't count towards anything else, because Labour's won the seat. What that means is you have a lot of the 2 biggest parties, which tend to always win one or the other, always tend to be the major party being contested, tend to win a lot of the votes. So this system is designed to basically make sure that bigger parties, larger parties win. So once again, each constituency, each area, okay, and you're all in different areas, okay, each constituency is its own little contest. And basically, if you voted for someone who did not win, your vote doesn't have any other impact. It doesn't affect anything else. If the person you vote for did not win in your constituency, then your vote basically has gone to waste. Now, if you look at the map on the right, that is a map of all the parties that came second. Now, you might remember from the 2015 election that the UKIP party did not do very well at all. But if you have a look at that map, these are all the constituencies in which it came second. Basically, UKIP only got one seat, but if you look at the map, they were second in a vast majority, well, not a majority, but a vast number of seats. What this basically shows is actually, if you're UKIP, you come second in all these different seats, but all those votes, because you came second, don't count. So despite getting about 3 million votes, they only got one seat because they came second with those 3 million votes in loads of different constituencies. Another way of showing it is this graph here. Okay, this is the number of actual seats won in the 2015 election. If you look, Tories won that many, Labour won that many, etc., etc., etc. On the right is what it would have looked like had it been proportional representation. Okay, you'll see that the UKIP is on the purple, the third one along has got far more seats. Lib Dems have got far more seats again. SNP's gone down, if anything, because they're very focused in a particular area. Okay, this is because proportional representation is designed that if you get 20% of the seats, 20% of the votes, sorry, you get 20% of the seats. So let's use UKIP's example. It becomes second in every single, well, in about 120 constituencies. Okay, that means it gets 0 seats from that, even though it gets all these people have voted for UKIP. However, under proportional representation, they come second, yes, but that doesn't really matter if you come first, second in the constituency, because they still get 20, 30, well, 15% of the vote. That means they get 15% of the seats. Essentially, proportional representation, because it equally distributes seats based on votes, means that you have a far fairer split of the seats. Okay, so you say the seats represent the number of people voted for. This has a number of positive and negative effects. The positive effects, obviously, it's more democratic and you can argue it's more fair. We're going to be focusing on negative effects on this because that's what matters to the exam. Okay, so if you first things first, in first past the post, we would have one big Catholic party, one big SPD, and they'll be able to run. However, if you look at this continuum here, there's actually 28 parties. I've only picked the most important 8. You have to, as a Chancellor, in order to pass laws, have 50% of the seats in the Reichstag. If you don't own over half the seats in Parliament, then every time you put a bill or a law in front of them, then what will happen is they will close it. They will turn it off. They'll go, no, we don't want it. So imagine if you were only SPD, you wanted to make a law, even if it was quite nice, all those other parties will cancel your law. They'll say no, they'll vote against it. So in order to get your votes through, you've got to get half the parties, half the seats on your side. Now this is actually quite tricky, because if you have a look of that continuum, the bits of purple, by the way, are the smaller parties, which are usually in between the bigger parties. So like I say, like the Deutsche Racial Party, for example, in between the DNPP and the NSDAP, who are the Nazis. If you have a look at that chart, in order to basically run the country, you have to have an alliance between what is usually at least 3 completely different parties. Okay, this is what we call a coalition. A coalition is when you have different parties working together in the same government. So, in order for the Chancellor to be able to do anything, he has to have control of at least 50% of the party, of the Reichstag. Okay. However, proportional representation meant that no party would ever have a majority. That means over 50%, which means that instead of having that, they would have to use a coalition. It also meant that since there was ever no obvious Chancellor, because even if you had the biggest party, for example, if you're the SPD, but no one wants to be in a coalition with you, you can't form a government, the President has a big role, because they might go, okay, this guy has the biggest party, but actually I don't think he has a chance of forming a government because no one likes the SPD, so instead I'm going to go for the Catholic Centre Party guy, for example. So this gives a lot of power to the President. That's your first thing. What you can point out is quite bad about this, because there is no obvious way to pick who should be in charge of the coalition. That it means the President has that power. But more than that, the job of the Chancellor is being able to keep a majority in the Reichstag. That means being able to get over 50% of the seats of the people who are in the Reichstag to support their government. This is a massive problem, because if you've got 52% of the seats, for example, or let's use 1924, 53% of the seats, as soon as one party, or even one part of a party, decides they don't like your government, you can't pass any laws because they'll vote against you. So say if you've got 53% of the seats and you want to get a law passed, and you lose 4% of the people, a very small party, but you lose 4% of it, you've only got 49%, which means that you can't pass any laws. That means your government fails, there has to be new elections, or at the very least a new coalition with a new chancellor. This leads to constantly changing governments. So once again, because this is a really key point, if you have a coalition government between lots of different parties, and there's no one big party, what it means is you've often got 3 to 5 different parties altogether. And obviously they are going to disagree with each other on issues. They are going to dislike each other on major issues. You can't have people on the left and the right together and agreeing on most things. What this means is eventually what always happens is one party gets upset at the other party, one party thinks their views aren't being heard, one party thinks their person should be in a certain ministry, but that someone else got given that, or whatever the issue is. They actually dislike, for example, one of the government falls because the DVP doesn't like the fact that they are replacing the old German imperial flag in embassies with a new German flag. The DVP walks out. That means the coalition doesn't have a majority, which means it falls, for example. But anyway, so these parties, one of these parties will walk away. And as soon as one of the parties walk away and you get below that 50% in the Reichstag, you can't work as a government. You can't pass laws, which means that you have to start either calling a new election or resign as a chancellor and hope a different person manages to get a coalition together. Okay? So there are 2 major effects of proportional representation that you need to know. First things first, it allows small parties or fringe parties, these are parties on the edges of politics, to exist. And more than that, it allows there to be 28 different parties, which means that it's even harder to form a majority. Even if each of these parties only has 1 to 3% of the votes, times that by 15, which are all the minor parties, and you've already made it very, very hard for the bigger parties to even get anywhere close to majority, okay, because you're eating into their numbers. So say if, I don't know, 10% of the seats always go to crazy right-wing radicals, and 5% seats go to non-communist left-wing radicals. You've already lost 15% of the seats. So now you've got to form a coalition of 85% of the seats. But then you've got to take out the communists, you've got to take out the DVP, you've got to take out the DNVP, all of which hate democracy, and the Nazis, to get rid of those. So the group that you can actually choose from to form your government is very thin. Okay. More than that, though, by allowing small parties to get representation in the Reichstag, by allowing small parties to be able to be in the Reichstag, what you are doing is giving them legitimacy and respectability. Well, what legitimacy means is it makes them look official. It makes them look like they are morally right. It makes them look like they are a proper political party. And so what this does is it makes extremists look less radical and look more official, which means that they are more likely to get more support later. And you can argue this is deeply negative. For example, the Nazis will get a lot of recognition nationally and legitimacy for what is basically a bunch of thugs, racist thugs, because they get into the Reichstag, and they must be a proper political party if they're in the Reichstag. The other major thing in the proportional representation, and people are good at mentioning this but not very good at explaining this, is that because you never have one large party in the Reichstag, this means that you always have to have coalitions, which means that these coalitions, as I mentioned, are very weak because they're made up usually between 3 and 5 parties, which means that every time one party has a problem with the Chancellor, has a problem with another party, disagrees with a policy, they walk out, the coalition crumbles. Okay? There are 7 different chancellors in 4 years between 1919 and 1923. Okay, that's and longest lasted 18 months. What this does, it has 2 effects. Number 1, many Germans who, if you remember, in 1919 were prepared to give democracy a chance, start losing respect for democracy. And they start losing respect for democratic parties. And the cynicism, that makes means suspicion and negativity, about democracy increases. Because many Germans were used to a political system under the Kaiser which was very stable. The Kaiser was in power until he died, and things were fine, and things got done, and it was fine. Yeah, it wasn't democratic really, but things got done. But now their experience is that these politicians are always arguing, always bickering, having issues with each other, and the governments are always reforming, always changing. Always every month or so there is a new government, there's a new chancellor, and they get this impression that democracy does not work. And that's what's really important about this, is it's very easy to lose track of the fact that actually democracy is not naturally good. People don't think it's naturally good. If you've been raised in a dictatorship, you think that's normal. So you don't naturally want democracy. So because of the incompetence of democracy and the incompetent changes in coalition, it means that many people start losing respect for democratic parties and start believing or listening to the ideas of extremist parties. The second one also means that if you are in a coalition and you are a chancellor, difficult decisions about tax, about in war, about how to change the economy to make sure it doesn't blow up or late in the future, can't be done. They have to be put off. Because if you're going to make a problem and a thing about, okay, we have these loans from America, they might end up causing us massive economic problems, we should tax people more and get off loans, someone in your coalition is not going to like that, and they're going to leave, and then your coalition is going to crumble. So what you end up doing is going, right, this is a really big issue, the power of the elites, for example, the role of the army, for example, the amount of tax one should pay, for example, the what to do about American loans, for example. These are big problems, but there's never going to be an agreement on them. So you just don't bother talking about them or trying to deal with them because you know it's going to split up your coalition. So these issues are put off, and they will become significantly bigger issues later on. The next major issue, and this is one that's simpler, which causes problems, is Article 48. This was designed to be an emergency power. The President could rule by decree, okay, rule by decree, in a time of emergency. This meant that he could get rid of certain as is suspect, there should be suspend citizens' rights. He can pass laws about the Reichstag and take command government services like the army and the police to do what he says. Okay? Now, so this obviously gives a lot of power to the presidency. And it's very easy to say why this is bad. For example, Hitler will be put into power and rule through Article 48. The important thing about this to point out is what makes this bad is what an emergency is entirely subjective and undescribed. Okay, there could be a legitimate emergency. For example, Ebert will use it 136 times to save the Republic from communists, for example, and to a lesser extent right-wingers. So that was an actual emergency. He used Article 48 and he saved the Republic. And that's what it was meant to be used for. However, you could describe anything as an emergency. You can make up a terrorist attack, you can make up a small threat and make it look like a big threat, whatever you want. And you can use that as an excuse, as Hitler and Hindenburg will do in the 1930s. So the big thing about Article 48 is actually, it is not really that bad in and of itself. It's a tool, it's like a gun. A gun is not inherently good or bad. It depends on how it's being used. It can be used to self-defend. So, for example, Ebert uses Article 48 to defend the Republic, to stop the Republic being taken over by communists and extremist right-wingers. Or it can be used for bad. And Hindenburg will use it in 1933 to put Hitler into power. So the thing about Article 48, if you're going to balance it, should be that actually, although obviously it gives a lot of power, and on balance it's too much and too risky, it's not itself inherently bad. Okay, it's the people that use it are bad. Okay. There's also Article 25, which gives the President the power to dissolve the Reichstag. What that means is split up and call for new elections. And this can be used to get rid of, if there are people who you don't like in the Reichstag and you think they won't get voted out next election, you can use this to dissolve them. This is a problem. As well as this, because the President had responsibility over the army and the judiciary, in theory, to stop the chance of getting too powerful, this meant the President, who already has Article 48, now has a lot more power. If you control the people with the guns and the people who decide what is legal and illegal, then you can use that a lot to threaten and get your way, and use that to remove your enemies. So Article 48 in the presidency is, the big thing I want to point out is the presidency is too strong. Okay? It is designed to be too strong. When that's in the hands of a good person like Ebert, it can be fine, and actually it's useful for the Republic. However, when it is in the hands of people who are not so positive, not so supportive of democracy, they could use this to destroy democracy, as we shall see with Hindenburg. So Article 48 is not inherently bad, but it is not necessarily good. So, the last few are quite quick. The Constitution guaranteed free speech, which basically meant that people could not be put in prison or arrested for things that they say, as long as it's not seditious. What that means is trying to make a revolution happen there and then. This is great, this is far more democratic, and this is good for a democratic society. You can't have a democratic society if you can't criticize the leader. Because if you're not allowed to criticize the leader, how are people meant to know when the government's ruling badly and therefore vote for someone else? However, you can argue that it gave too much free speech, and actually it meant that people who were anti-democratic and hated the Weimar government were able to criticize, call for revolution, make stuff up, destroy the authority of the president, and say all sorts of things, and say, well, I'm allowed to do this because of free speech. So, for example, Hitler in 1926 onwards will get his SA, his private army, made legal again because he says, well, it's just free speech if I'm allowed to have an SA. Yes, I want to get rid of democracy, but that's my right to say that. And the SA are allowed to exist to help me advance that message. So you can argue by having too much free speech, it strengthens the elites. Sorry, the elites and literally to extreme parties who hate and want to destroy democracy. Obviously, the thing to point out, though, is what's the alternative? Would you have no free speech? Is that democratic? Okay, finally, the elites were also completely unaffected by the Constitution. And so this is an interesting one, because the other ones are things in the Constitution which cause problems. And this one is something that is not in the Constitution, and because it's not in the Constitution, causes problems. Essentially, the elites are the people who are in control of the top of society. They're in charge of the army, the judiciary, who are the judges, in charge of industry, who own all the land, in charge of the civil service. And the civil service are the people who run actually the nuts and bolts of running the country. Politicians make decisions, civil servants actually do it. These people will gain their power, gain position under the Kaiser. So they are naturally anti-democratic, naturally very, very right-wing, naturally suspicious of the communists and the socialists, and naturally wanting to go back to the good old days. So having these people is a massive threat, because they can use and will use this power to hurt democracy and make it harder to run. However, the Constitution does not do anything to reduce their power. It leaves them alone. It leaves the army to be independent. It leaves the judiciary to be independent. It leaves the civil servants to be independent. It doesn't do any changes to who owns the land and who owns the industry. So it means that these guys now have retained the power in society. So now you've got these guys who are under the Kaiser, hate democracy, who have a lot of power. And that's a failure of the Constitution to not reduce that. Now, you can argue, and this was Ebert's logic, that in the short term this is actually a good thing. Because if you try to get rid of the army's power, fire all the army officers, fire all the judges, fire all the take all the land and factories from the industrialists and landowners, and fire all the civil servants, they won't take that. They know they're strong. And so what they'll do is a counter-revolution. If you attack someone, you attack someone. If you counterattack, you attack them back. A counter-revolution is to go back on the revolution. And what this means in this case is they would bring back the Kaiser. So Ebert thought that I can't get rid of these people's power because they are so powerful that if I tried to, they would just bring back the Kaiser and destroy democracy. It's better to have democracy and slowly change the elites than it is to just try this and then lose democracy. However, you can point out in the long term it's bad, because from this position of power, the judges, the army, the industry, the civil service and landowners will constantly undermine and hurt Weimar. And we'll be seeing that in future lessons about how they support the violence, how they put Hitler into power, how they make sure that people like Hitler and extremists don't never serve any long prison times for their crimes. And they also cause divisions in the left. So the argument about this is, because the Constitution doesn't reduce the power of the elites, it makes Weimar democracy in the longer term significantly weaker. Right. The strengths of the Constitution. We've said a lot of negative things, and it's very easy to say negative things, and you will need to say negative things. However, to get the A star, it's always useful to sort of balance off by explaining certain things. So, you can point out it's very, very democratic, that it gives a Bill of Rights, which guarantees citizens' rights, such as freedom of speech, and the right to belong to a union, which are fantastically left-wing and progressive ideas, which was above even what Britain had at the time. Okay, you can argue the Constitution is very good at stopping the Chancellor becoming too powerful, even if it's not very good at stopping the President from becoming too powerful. You can argue it's very good that all political opinion is allowed to be included, because as soon as you ban one party by saying, oh, I don't like them because they're anti-democratic, someone can misuse that power and ban any party they don't like. So you might say, I'm going to ban the Nazis because they hate democracy, but an SPD person might say, I'm also going to ban the Centre Party because whatever reason I fancy. So actually, by allowing everyone to exist and allowing extremist parties, you're probably actually stopping dictatorship to some extent. The President was a good balance for the Parliament, And this is the design behind Article 48. So you can argue the strengths are in giving people's rights and stopping the Reichstag becoming too powerful. Obviously the weaknesses, though, are on balance, it gives too much power to the president. Another thing I'd mention about proportional representation, because it's very easy to trash that, is point out that actually proportional representation doesn't necessarily mean chaos. Many countries today still use proportional representation. Germany, as I mentioned at the start of this lesson, uses proportional representation. And they do not have as much political chaos. They're generally slightly more politically divided and they're more likely to sort of fail than first past the post, but they're not getting Nazis, at least not yet. So what we're going to point out is actually it's not just proportional representation, it's the people who are in the system. If you have people who are, nowadays most parties in Germany understand that they're going to have to compromise. They understand that they might not get what they want, and so they will make deals, and that when something happens which one of the parties in the coalition doesn't like, they are mature enough to go, you know what, it's fine, like let's carry on because of whatever. You know, we still want to be part of the coalition. You can argue that the political parties in Weimar Republic weren't as mature, and therefore stormed out of a coalition whenever they didn't get anything they wanted. So maybe we can even blame not proportional representation, but the parties in the proportional representation, because they were the ones being immature and not making the system work. A system which is designed for coalition needs people who want to make a coalition. So overall, we cannot simply blame the Constitution for all the problems. A, it may set up the problems, but there's a lot of other things which help Hitler come to power and cause all the problems down the line. As well as this, B, the Constitution is only a piece of paper. It cannot be blamed for actions. You can argue that its real problem is it was misused. Article 48 was misused. Free speech was misused. The lack of the respect it gave to the elites and how it left the elites alone was misused by elites. And proportional representation was misused by people who didn't want to compromise. And so you can argue that actually, had the situation been better, had Germany not had as much political chaos, not as much economic chaos, the problems in the constitutions probably wouldn't be as bad. Okay, so we can argue that actually the Constitution is not great, but ultimately all the issues from it were people misusing it. The president using Article 48 badly, the parties not compromising and breaking governments, people hiding behind free speech, etc., rather than the Constitution itself. However, the balance to that is obviously by having proportional representation and having Article 48 in a system, in a brand new democracy, which would clearly, would lead to problems, and one could arguably see the fact that it might lead to problems. And you can argue by having Article 48 and by having free speech and by not hurting the elites and by having proportional representation, it made the jobs of the enemies of democracy easier, because they will use that to hurt and destroy democracy. If the Constitution did not have these things, the job of the elites and job of the Nazis, the job of the communists, the job of people who hate democracy would be harder. Next lesson we're going to look at the Treaty of Versailles. Remember that this first quarter of the course is all about why is Germany so chaotic, particularly between 1918 and 1924.